Thank you. So, welcome to today's NASEO-NARUC GEB Working Group Forum. We are fortunate today to have a focus on the recent RMI Virtual Power Plant Flipbook to be provided by Mary Tobin of RMI. And she will be followed by two utility speakers who you will hear about in a bit. Yoh Kawanami, if I pronounce your name correctly, from Hawaiian Electric, and Amy Findlay with Eversource. Before handing the floor to Ashley Norman, our esteemed co-chair from the Hawaii PUC, a few logistics items and a short bit on the working group. I'll say a bit for those of you who are new to the forum and to the working group. I do want to extend my thanks to Jasmine Shia, my NASEO colleague, for support of this. And I also want to pause for a moment to see if our good friend and partner from NARUC, Jeff Loiter, if you have a few words.
Thanks, Rod. Always appreciate that. And welcome to our members who are here. We really value our collaboration between NASEO and NARUC in this and some other topic areas because of the important intersections of our collective memberships activities. And I'll put something in the chat here with more detail, but we have a call coming up on October 8th, and we call it a surge call, and it's focused on our commission staff, not commissioners, to provide a sort of a safe peer learning space to really talk about issues. And we're going to have one about savings attribution for energy efficiency investments in light of all the funding from the federal laws from IRA and Bill. And because state energy offices are so central in that, we want to extend an invitation to our NASEO friends to join us for that conversation. So I'll put some information about that in the chat, and I hope that you will share it with your other colleagues in your energy offices if that's who, if you've got someone who specializes in that area or in those programs. We really want to facilitate that dialogue on that important issue. Thanks, Rod.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And we're very grateful for the collaboration as well, and welcome this opportunity too. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So a little bit on the logistics. Please mute when not speaking. This forum is meant to be interactive. After the presentations, we'll have a Q&A and discussion period. Please use the raise hand to be recognized. The chat function is also available. And we will be recording. Usually we record only for internal purposes, but we have had a couple of requests of people who could not join us today for the recording. We will record today, and the presentation portion will be posted, but we do want to ensure that any discussion after the presentations can be frank, so we will cut those out. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of an overview for those who are new to the group. We've been around for several years now. We are supported by Department of Energy's Building Technologies Office, but we also collaborate with the Office of Electricity and others, and with the national laboratories. We have 30 states and territories participating, mostly from the PUCs and energy offices. We also have some utility consumer advocate community involvement as well. Next slide. So just a little review of some of the recent items that we posted on the website, just to keep you informed. The Connected Communities 2.0 funding opportunity is on the street. The concept papers were already due, but the full applications are coming up. Please keep attuned to those projects which may be applying from your states. There are about a dozen projects under the first tranche, and they're doing some really interesting things. A couple of resources. Lawrence Berkeley Lab has put out the State of Demand Flexibility Programs and Rates. Jeff had mentioned another collaboration of ours, the DER Integration and Compensation Initiative, NASEO-NARUC, with our friends at RMI, the aggregated DERs report, which you will probably hear a little bit from Mary and I believe Avery from RMI is also joining us today and may offer a few words during that portion of today's program. MIA, the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, had a webinar back in July. The recording is available also on VPPs. And the Department of Energy has made available to state energy offices and to the regulators a technical assistance program. We do have a link to that, and I believe that's still available. And please mark on your calendar September 24th, the Cal Flex Hub, run by Lawrence Berkeley Lab under the California Energy Commission funding, has its symposium on the 24th. This is a hybrid event, so there is an online component if you can't be in Berkeley that day. So we do ask for your suggestions on future forum topics. Next slide. I think this is the one with the questions for thought to think about as you hear the upcoming presentations about, do you have demand flexibility programs in your state? Are they more sort of the old-fashioned demand response, curtailment kind of programs? Do you have some more dynamic VPP-oriented programs going on? Think about the way benefits can be measured, whether they're I shouldn't say easily, but more readily monetizable grid-related costs, or are you also including reliability, resilience, environmental, social impact costs as well? Think about maybe, are there incentives for utilities to make use of distributed resources? And I think we'll hear a bit about that. And for VPP services, are there impediments? Are the impediments technical in orientation, or are they sort of legal and regulatory in nature? Think about, are aggregators allowed in your states, or is it easy for them or not so easy for them to operate? As I recall, there are some states where that's kind of a problem. And also thinking about rate design and program incentives to encourage customer uptake of programs as well. And another thought is, when we think about virtual power plants, sometimes we think, or often we think of the bulk grid, but can these sorts of mechanisms of demand flexibility also provide localized distribution grid stress relief? So with that, let me hand it over to Ashley to take on the rest of the program.
Excellent. Thank you, Rodney, and aloha, everyone. Great to be with you all today, and thank you for making time to attend, specifically to our presenters, who we'll get to meet here in a moment. Thank you for all of your hard work to prepare for today's session. And of course, a warm mahalo to Rodney, Jasmine, Jeff, and your whole leadership team for this and the many events you pulled together for us. I find that this GEB Working Group is such a wonderful resource, an opportunity to collaborate across our state agencies and to learn from each other in this very, interesting and ever-evolving GEB space. So a bit more about me. My name is Ashley Norman. I'm a utility analyst here at the Hawaii State Public Utilities Commission. For the last 7 years or so at the PUC, I've had the fortunate opportunity to be primarily focused in our work with the Hawaii Energy Program, who is our state's third-party energy efficiency implementer, who service Hawaiian electric customers. You actually get to hear from Yoh Kawanami later today in the presentations from Hawaiian Electric. So looking forward to that. And lastly, I've been about a 4-year attendee or a member of this NASEO-NARUC GEB Working Group. It's been great to be co-chairing this last year or so. And I also help co-lead our Hawaii-based GEB Working Group with my colleague at our energy office, Gail Suzuki-Jones. And so with that, again, welcome to everyone. I will turn it over to the presenters who, when it is their time to present, can share with us a bit about their bio as an intro to their presentations. And of course, as Rodney said, the topic today is on virtual power plants. We also know them as VPPs, and the forum focus is on RMI's VPP Flipbook. And with these few state examples, from that very important resource. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mary Tobin from RMI to kick off the forum. Thanks, everyone. Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Ashley, for that, and for Rodney and team for having us. We are very thrilled here to be sharing a bit about RMI's Flipbook and welcome the discussion afterwards. So let me pull up my slides here. Okay, I see green light on my side, so I can see a smile from Ashley, so good to go here. Thanks all for that. To start, I want to give a brief introduction. My name is Mary Tobin, and I'm a senior associate at the electricity practice at RMI. I work on the Virtual Power Plant Partnership, and I lead our Working with Utilities Working Group, where our focus is scaling the market for VPPs, specifically the Utilities Working Group, disseminating resources such as the VPP Flipbook, and then hosting convenings and conversations with utilities to better understand how best we can leverage VPPs to provide critical needs for the grid today. I've been with RMI for about a year and a half now, and we launched VP3 in January of 2023, and I've been there since the beginning. Before diving into the Flipbook, I did want to give a chance for my colleague Avery to introduce herself and speak a bit about the ADER report that's recently published, and Jeff mentioned, or Rodney mentioned on the slide of resources. So Avery, I'll pass it to you before we dive into the Flipbook.
Thanks, Mary. Hey, everyone. I'm Avery McAvoy, also a senior associate in the electricity practice at RMI. Also work on the Virtual Power Plant Partnership with Mary. I'm our regulatory and policy lead and lead that working group. And I'm also staffed on the project that worked on this aggregated distributed energy resources fundamentals report. Have had the pleasure of working with NARUC and NASEO, and I've really appreciated that collaboration on that initiative. Speaking a little bit just about that report, I know all of us see links about reports all the time, but I really do encourage you to click the link to open this one up. It builds upon existing literature like the 2016 DER manual and leading examples of taking a flavor of aggregated DERs or VPPs to talk about pricing and programs in practice to equip commissioners and staff at public utilities commissions and state energy offices with the fundamentals of how aggregated DERs can provide these grid services, the different options for valuation and approaches to compensation. We structure this report to ask fundamental questions to make it more approachable and accessible, and we try to connect you to many other resources. We're not necessarily reinventing the wheel. We're just trying to connect all of the dots because aggregated DERs is such an integrated topic. And we actually closed the report featuring 3 case studies. They are Green Mountain Power's Bring Your Own Device and lease programs in Vermont, Connected Solutions, which I'm sure we will also hear about today, and the evolution of the DER programs in Hawaii. So a great connection between this. Mary and I shared a lot of discussion and research across our 2 work streams. So appreciate the opportunity to just share and encourage y'all to check out that report. And Mary, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Avery. I echo the sentiment. Could be more appropriate with the examples that we have today. And yes, both reports were developed in parallel for sharing some of those case studies and resources. So definitely check out that report. So without further ado, I'll spend the next 20 minutes or so diving in to explain about the Virtual Power Plant Flipbook resource. First, to provide an overview for the next 20-minute presentations, 3 primary objectives. First, to provide an overview for RMI, the Virtual Power Plant Partnership, and the Flipbook. Second, showcase a variety of VPP approaches and the roles of utilities, third parties, and customer within them, as showcased in this document. And third, discuss takeaways for VPP implementation. And on the right here to do that for the agenda, we'll be walking through some of the key questions about roles, responsibilities from the different case studies that we have, and then some of our leading takeaways for VPP implementation that can be incorporated into future VPPs. So first, a brief introduction for RMI and the Virtual Power Plant Partnership. RMI is a global nonprofit focused on the energy transition. We have 700 RMIers worldwide. We focus on decarbonizing key sectors, including the electricity sector pertinent for this conversation, using powerful market catalysts to drive the energy transition around the world. And so I share that because although VP3 is a smaller team within RMI, we're backed and leveraged by the expertise of our colleagues around the world. The Virtual Power Plant Partnership within the electricity practice was launched in January 2023, funded by VPP technology and service providers to catalyze industry and change the necessary policies, regulations, and market rules to scale VPPs to benefit communities and societies. We have 3 primary objectives or ways that we advance these priorities through creating and compiling research and resources, such as the Flipbook, convening the industry and its supporters. We host 2 convenings throughout the year, and then also engaging in forums such as this with policymakers and utilities to discuss our findings and learn more about how these resources and VPPs can be best leveraged. We have 4 working groups. The Flipbook is related to the utilities working group, but we have 3 others. And as Mary mentioned, she's the lead for our regulatory and policy working group. Before diving into the Flipbook specifically, I did want to level set on some definitions because I know with virtual power plants, there's several definitions that you might have seen. The definition that we use in talking about the Flipbook and the VP3 is intentionally broad, that a VPP is an aggregation of grid integrated DERs that can balance electrical loads and provide utility scale and utility grid resources. We use a broad definition intentionally to encompass a wide variety of technologies, business models, and applications that the adaptability and versatility of VPPs can provide. And then thinking a bit about why VPPs, what are the primary benefits that they can provide and that we're trying to advance through VP3. We think about the 7 DOE benefits that are included in their Pathways to Commercial Liftoff report. And so you can see them listed left to right here. We have them listed with on the left, the benefits that were ranked the most compelling based on some utility interviews that we have conducted. But you can see a variety of benefits, including benefits related to pressing grid needs today, such as resource adequacy, T&D, infrastructure relief, reliability, and resilience, as well as critical societal benefits for community empowerment, enabling consumers to be part of the energy and transition and play an active role, decarbonization and affordability, both for the utility and the ratepayer. And so you'll see these benefits also reflected throughout the Flipbook, but these are the primary benefits that we think about when we're talking about VPPs and why their importance of how they can address some of the grid challenges today. So with that, I did want to, before touching on the Flipbook, just briefly mention another report that we have released this summer, the Summer Reliability Brief, which is a 9-page brief describing how VPPs are being used to support grid reliability and affordability with examples, especially as we're, yes, I guess the tail end of summer for some, but also the heat of the summer for others, that depending where you might be in the country. So now I'm going to transition to discussing the key insights from the Flipbook. First, I want to provide a bit of an impetus for why the Flipbook and kind of what's included in this document. Each year, more and more utilities are developing VPPs to provide critical grid services in a rapidly changing power system. In light of load growth, extreme weather, and changing power supply, there is a need for rapid, deployable, versatile, and affordable solutions to ensure reliability, resilience, and affordability. VPPs support and optimize existing infrastructure to address near-term and long-term grid needs. Yet developing a VPP can be challenging and can require new program designs and reimagined practices. Yet there are a wealth of resources and existing VPPs and examples that stakeholders can look for when developing a VPP in their region. And that is part of what we hope to do with the Flipbook, is that we hope it can be a foundational resource as stakeholders look to implement VPPs at their utility or at their jurisdiction. It is a collection of 14 VP utility case studies and their takeaways to help utilities implement efficient and impactful VPP programs. I'll note that this was developed with the utility audience in mind, which is why it is a focus on retail, utility, and VPP programs, but we hope that other audiences as well can find the takeaways impactful as they're thinking about VPPs as it relates to their jurisdiction. I'll also note that this is not a comprehensive survey of VPP programs across the country. Our initial impetus with this collection is to showcase a variety of different technologies, different stages, different compensation models, utility roles, geographic diversity, to help showcase the variety of models that we're seeing when discussing VPPs across the country. This is the table of contents, and I just want to orient you to the sections that we'll be diving deeper in today. We're going to be talking about the introductory content, which sets up some of the frameworks and decision points for a utility of how they might be involved in a VPP, as well as decisions regarding the customer, which is incredibly important in VPP development, as well as touching on takeaways for implementation as the conclusion section. I am not going to be discussing some of the case studies because Yoh and Amy are going to be speaking for their specific examples. And so we can wait to hear directly from them as how is they're implementing and thinking about this at their utilities. So first, VPPs and their benefits. Why are utilities advancing VPPs? We think about this in two ways in the flipbook. The first are the primary drivers that I touched on previously. And I'll note that depending on the utility, their motivations for developing a VPP might be slightly different. Perhaps their utility or their jurisdiction has really strong state energy or decarbonization goals, and they're looking for VPPs to help decarbonize their energy supply and leverage more renewables. Perhaps peak capacity and resource adequacy is a concern, and they're looking for VPPs as that capacity shaping resource. Perhaps reliability and resiliency, their jurisdiction, storms, other threats, increasing extreme weather, that might be the primary benefit. And so how we've laid this out is that capturing the primary benefit when talking with utilities of what is motivating them, and capturing that in hopes that when folks are looking at this resource, they can find examples that most resonate with the challenges that they're facing in their region, and can find case studies that map best accordingly. Those are the drivers. In addition to the drivers on the grid, there are some grid services that VPPs can provide as far as ways of thinking of utilities being compensated or the tangential service addressing a specific need, including capacity, peak shaving, ancillary services, so those more instantaneous benefits, voltage and frequency response, and then resilience, the resistance to outages as the capturing the primary motivators. I did want to take a step back as far as there's the utility why and like larger, what is the potential impact for VPPs as scale and quantify. And we think about this, this is from the DOE Pathways to Commercial Liftoff report, that the VPP capacity could grow to 80 to 160 gigawatts by 2030. And to put that in broader terms, that tripling the VPP scale by 2030 could address 10 to 20% of peak load while saving on the order of magnitude $10 billion per year as the broader market potential and impetus for growing and scaling VPPs. So that's kind of the context of the why, what's the potential. And I want to dive a bit into what is the utility's role in a VPP and the framework that we have outlined. I'll note that this is not in exhaustive or end all be all, but just something that we've noticed during our research of the 4 key roles. We're thinking about from a high level how a utility might be involved in some of the decision points with that, as far as some of the different models. So there are 4 key roles that we explore in the flipbook. I'll define each of them briefly. The first is the off-taker, so who's calling the resources, who's calling the event. That could be the utility or a market operator in the case of a wholesale market. The operator who's aggregating the resources, that could be either the utility or a third-party service provider. Third is customer enrollment, who's enrolling the customer. This could be an OEM, an installer, or the utility. And fourth is the customer payment channel. This could also be the OEM or a third-party service provider, or in some cases, it could be the utility themselves or a combination of both. And so we've broken it down in this way of both from how a customer is interfacing and some of the relationships they are managing, as well as some of the decision points for the utility along the way. And so there are 3 broad structures that we introduce as examples, going from thinking about least involvement to greatest involvement from the utility. These are kind of broad terms to think about this. So the first is a turnkey VPP, and think of it perhaps as a VPP in a box. where the utility is contracting with one third-party service provider who's often handling the operation, the enrollment, the customer payment, often taking the risk for some of these programs, and is basically handling everything from soup to nuts. And what the utility is often seeing is a contract agreement for, here are the megawatts that we are going to respond to the service that we're going to provide, and everything else the third party is handling, and potentially is leveraging some of their existing customer relationship to scale resources quickly. Next, we have what's a utility managed third party operated VPP. And so what this might entail is that you have the electric utility is using a third party. They're calling the resources, but then they're leveraging a third party VPP IT platform to leverage the resources. And so the third party is acting as the operator. Then you have the customer enrollment. It could be a third party aggregator. It could be the OEM platform, different actors enrolling. And in this case, although different actors are enrolling the customer payment channel in this case is handled by perhaps on-bill payments. So that's the utility is handling that payment. And I'll note that this is an example of an open access VPP where multiple third parties might participate, shown here, as opposed to a closed access where only a single third party might participate. And lastly, the third model that we have introduced here is utility orchestrated. So on the flip side, this is where the utility is managing the operations, customer enrollment, and customer payment channel. They might be partnering with a third party as the back end interface, so helping with some of the software and enrollment platforms. Although from the customer experience, they're seeing the utility interface the whole way through for a seamless customer experience. But more or less, the utility is taking ownership of the roles and responsibilities throughout the process. And so again, the purpose of these models is to showcase the variety of different approaches that we're seeing and breaking down some of the decision points to better kind of compare and contrast across the features that are in the flipbook. So this is a bit about the utility role. In addition to the utility role, the customer engagement and the customer experience is crucial to success of these programs, especially at the end of the day, if customers aren't enrolling, if they're not participating, then that is crucial for that enrollment to make sure you have a successful and enrolled VPP. And so we're thinking about this in 5 different key decision points amongst the way. Briefly to go through these, first on the left here, device ownership, who owns the device, the customer, or in some cases, it could be customer sited or financed or owned by a third party utility. Next, participation incentives, how are customers incentivized? There's a variety of ways showcased in the flipbook, including upfront and completion payments, such as a gift card, performance payments, monthly or annual bill credits, DER rebates to reduce upfront costs, or bill reductions to shifting and time of use rates. So lots of different decision points here about how customers can be compensated for participating in these programs. Third, who controls the DER dispatch, whether it's autonomously VPP controlled without customer override, so the customer is signing up and they cannot override or control their device. Second, that the VPP is initiated by the technology, but the customer is able to override it if necessary. And third, customer control, whether responding to a response or perhaps maybe in a commercial and industrial program where part of the agreement is that the business owner is responding to these flex signals, but they're maintaining control of their devices. So a variety of different control frameworks that are also captured in here. Then, second to last, sometimes there are additional participation requirements for each program, such as contract length or being unable to participate in a conflicting program. And lastly, how often is the device being dispatched? Frequency, so there are some examples of daily programs, seasonally or solely for emergencies. Duration, some quick on the order of 5 minutes up to several hours. And scheduling, examples of dynamically scheduled programs to day ahead or day of signals, or statistically scheduled based on historic patterns. And so in the beginning of the flipbook, we walk through some of these initial decision points and frameworks. And then in the case studies, we have a summary table that walks through each kind of these metrics to help organize. And so just to walk through this briefly, first, we have an overview part of the table that walks through drivers, grid services, metrics of customers and roles for each program. Then the VPP roles and responsibilities of that first diagram, who's the off-taker, the operator enrolling the payment or the customer, is it the utility, is it the third-party OEM? And lastly, the customer experience, walking through for each program the decision points there, who owns the device, how is the DER being controlled, dispatching, how often, for what duration, how is it being signaled, to help pull some of these key programmatic elements out for each of the case studies. So that's a quick overview of some of the kind of the why and the what's of the programmatic elements of VPPs. And before passing it to Yoh and Amy to speak to their specific examples, I did want to touch on the takeaways for VPP implementation, some leading practices to consider. And how we've broken this up is into two parts. First, effective program design. What are some programmatic design elements to consider? And second, on the utility processes practices, what are some processes that can help enable VPPs to be developed and considered? So first, I'll walk through the 5 recommendations of leading practice for program design and connect them with a common challenge that we've observed in our research. So the first is a common challenge is that technology-specific programs lead to fragmenting customer experience and increase management burden. And so a practice to address this is that open access to a VPP to integrate multiple technologies, vendors, and programs can help both to enable customers to have choice on which provider and device that they want to join, as well as think about how value stacking where possible on multiple technologies and multiple services can help increase the value of the VPP, both for utility and the customer to leverage for a variety of services and be compensated for such. The second is that limited staff capacity or experience with VPPs can be it may a lot of operational management burden for the utility when implementing VPPs. And the practice in that is developing partnerships with third-party providers and complementary capabilities can be helpful. So for example, third parties can help manage enrollment, capacity commitments, alleviate some of that staffing constraints, as well as auto-enroll some of their existing customers for fast deployment. And so it can be a way to leverage some of their knowledges and help mitigate some of that staff capacity burden that can be possible when implementing a VPP. Third is that complicated customer experience limits enrollment or participation. And the practice is streamlining customer experience during enrollment and participation. So keeping it simple and thinking about that customer experience from start to finish, easy enrollment, easy unenrollment, clear communications, consistent communications are key in making sure the customer's journey through the program is seamless and they understand what's being asked of them is crucial. Additionally, we've seen in some models like a set and forget structure where for the customer that wants to be able to set their device, be enrolled, and then forget and not think about their device daily is one approach as well that has worked well. Ultimately, it's been found that customers have a lot of different preferences and styles. And so thinking about the customer base and also having a variety of different options for how they might want to participate is also something else that we've seen considered. Fourth, unclear payback for customers and aggregators limits interest. So executing longer term contracts can help making sure there's enough runway for some of these programs. And fifth, upfront cost barriers to preventing DER adoption and preventing equitable DER adoption. So thinking of different ways to incentivize DERs to enable additional customer participation, whether through on-bill financing, potentially a lease, rebates or upfront payments as a ways to incentivize those and limit that upfront burden that can prohibit customers from joining. So that's a brief overview of the design practices. Lastly, I'll end with some of the leading utility processes that can support VPP deployment and some of those programmatic designs. The first is incorporating DERs into generation and distribution planning. Specifically, iteratively integrating DERs into the planning processes. Benefit of VPPs is that they are versatile and adaptable to changing grid needs. And so looking at VPPs iteratively as those changes evolve, as lessons are learned, can help making sure that VPPs and DERs are being considered as grid challenges evolve. Secondly, having transparent evaluation metrics are also helpful in making sure that the VPPs are being considered, as well as the full stack of value that they can provide. Secondly is proactively engaging regulators and policymakers around effective VPP policy. In addition to the Flipbook, the VPP regulatory and policy team released the VPP policy principles, which is a set of 17 policy principles to help enable equitable, affordable VPPs, and is something I recommend also checking out when thinking about the policies that can help support VPP development. And third, some consideration to business practices. I think first, implementing cross-functional teams. VPP programs involve the customer-facing groups, the planning folks, the operation folks, and so having pathways and processes in place to share learnings and share developments is something that we've seen and to take away for some of these programs and how VPPs are being developed. And lastly, thinking about how to automate some of the administrative paid-in payment and some of those processes too can make sure on the utility side internally that things from start to finish can go seamlessly as possible. Lastly, we have a step process in the Flipbook of what are some of the steps developing a VPP to incorporate those, both the programmatic takeaways and the implementation process takeaways, to think about what are some questions to ask along the way for development. Starting with considering the DERs available today and the grid future and grid needs, focusing on iteration and that aspect of, as programs are being developed, continuously reiterating and incorporating lessons learned as programs develop to increase and further develop the program as it's being developed. So with that, I'll leave you with 3 key takeaways before I'll pass it to Yoh and Amy to share a bit from their perspectives. Is that 1, VPPs are real and tangible. They aren't science fiction, and they provide real benefits today. And the case studies in the Flipbook are showcasing how utilities across the country have been leveraging VPPs and their lessons learned. 2, VPP approaches are diverse, both thinking about the utility perspective, the technology involved, how to engage customers. This is both a source of innovation as the market develops and also an obstacle to scaling as we're thinking of what processes that can continue to scale. And I think currently, depending on what's best, a lot of it does depend on what are the challenges and what are the resources available for that specific utility, and setting up the Flipbook in a way that can help map some of those challenges to help folks, the readers, read case studies that are most applicable to them. And third, successful implementation supported both program design and practices and thinking about where our next steps to implement at another utility or another jurisdiction. So that, I want to thank you, everyone. I look forward to the subsequent discussion, and I'll pass it. I guess, Ashley, maybe I'll pass it to you to make sure I'm introducing the correct speaker.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Avery. What a great presentation and just a fabulous resource for both those of us already active in the VPP deployment space and for those jurisdictions that are just learning, how to adopt and potentially incorporate VPP deployment in their sphere. Before moving on to Yoh with our local Hawaii example, can you just actually answer one quick question, Mary, that came up actually from Amy, sorry, that'll be speaking later. So it's regarding the leading practice that you mentioned on slide 19, item 1.1. Can you just define for the group what you mean when you say open access in a VPP? And then we can address the other questions later in the Q&A portion at the end of the presentations. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Amy, for your question. How we're defining open access VPP is when multiple third parties or OEMs can participate. So we've seen programs where multiple aggregators can participate, multiple OEMs, and so this enables customer choice to choose the OEM or the service provider that's right for them, versus there are other programs where there is one service provider that's being contracted or preference for one OEM for variety of potential reasons. That would be a closed access. So defining that based on who can participate and how that impacts customer choice.
Thank you, Mary. And again, there's more opportunity for Q&A at the end of all presentations, so feel free to keep entering in the chat, or you can save them to share out loud when we have the Q&A session. So with that, I will turn it over to Yoh Kawanami from Hawaiian Electric. Welcome, Yoh.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Jasmine, for sharing screens. Hello, everyone. My name is Yoh. I am the Director of Customer Energy Resources. I am a co-director of this area. We combined demand response and distributed energy resource, two departments, into one about 5-6 years ago now. And I've been doing demand response, DER related things for my entire career at Hawaiian Electric for about 12 years. Here to thank you for the invitation. Here to talk about one of our virtual power plants program, battery bonus, and happy to answer any questions regarding our experience. Next slide, please. So one of the key questions was how do we get there? How do we lead towards battery bonus? A lot of you already know about Hawaiian Electric. We track each other's utilities goals. We at state of Hawaii has a renewable energy target of 100% by 2045. Equivalently, there's a decarbonization goal by 2045. So a few years ago, we created this climate change action plan. Before we get to the 2045, to target the 70% target reduction by 2030. 8 goals were identified. One of them was the shutting down of the last coal plant, retiring 6 more generation units thereafter, increase more rooftop solar. We're about 90,000. We wanted to increase another 50, increase 1 gigawatt worth of renewables, add grid scale batteries, customer sided batteries. Is there more geothermal? Make sure, don't forget about energy efficiency, and let's make sure we do this in low cost energy type approach. These were our 8 goals. What really drove battery bonus was the top left, the shutting down of the coal plant. When that date got imminently close, the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission asked a very fair question. What are you replacing that coal plant's 150, 180 megawatts worth of energy with? It was intended to be renewable, no question, but with a variety of situations, whether that was COVID or supply chain or permitting, what have you, all different types of situation calls for delays of many of our renewable projects. And we were more than likely to be replacing a coal plant with another fossil fuel. The Hawaii PUC saw that as a inexcusable approach to keeping the lights on. So we looked at customer-sided resource, our area, as a opportunity to do this. So why is that? Next slide, please. The portfolio of our grid. This Hawaiian Electric manages 5 islands: Oahu, Hawaii Island, also known as Big Island, and Maui County. Maui County is Maui, Lanai, and Molokai. 3 islands is under this. If you could look at the left-hand side, that's the consolidated RPS. We are at 33%, and you can see the variety of different portfolio of renewables that we have, all the way at the top of hydro to the bottom of customer DER. When we think about RPS, where we are in our renewables, Hawaii, as you can see, is very unique. I don't think you're going to see too many other jurisdictions where customer-sided resource has this much amount of involvement in calculating the RPS. I wouldn't call it half, but it's 30-40% of the total picture. So the Hawaii PUC thought that many of these customer DERs, rooftop solar, didn't have a battery. So if we add a battery, the key element of losing that coal plant was peak time, and how do we bridge that resource? So that's how battery bonus came about. Next slide. Mary had a presentation on the Flipbook. I enjoyed it. Thank you for your presentation, Mary. Sorry, Mary, I stole your slide on the way to explain battery bonus, I was going to create something very similar, but I really like the flipbook style. So I took Mary's and RMI's product here. So battery bonus, the overview, it is for resource adequacy, decarbonization, reduction. We targeted residential, commercial. I mentioned the coal plant for Oahu. We eventually, following year, I think, we did this for Maui as well, with very similar reasons that we really wanted to foster the customer-sided resource to the maximum possibility. And the megawatts enrolled, these are applications, nearly 50 megawatts for Oahu and nearly 10 megawatts for Maui. And Mary, this was a super minor typo. The total customer enrollments is actually 7,500. The 4,000 is today, about August. 4,000 customers are enabled. So we have these 4,000 customers actively participating on this. One of the key element of this, where am I looking? Let me keep on going. So customer experience, this could be a device, could be customer or third party owned. The participation incentive, this was very high at $850 per kW upfront. Initially, that was the starting point. We did not have anything else, but believe it or not, the ramp was actually on the slower side. We were on high urgency. The September 2022 date was very, very close to us. So through discussion with the Hawaii PUC and the DER parties, we added another layer of incentives, the monthly type of incentives, to further make this participation incentive lucrative. And the third item, it's non-dispatchable. We don't send a signal to this. This is a scheduled dispatch, and Mary talked about the different ways of connection. One of the questions was the open access to VPP. To be able to communicate to a battery can get challenging, and in a short runway that we had, we couldn't do an RFP and say select one platform, or we couldn't come up with making an open market where everyone can do a dispatchable system. We just didn't have that ability to figure that out. So it came out to be a scheduled dispatch of a 2-hour window. Our peak time, which is 5 to 9, we focused it on the peak, which is about 6 to 8:30 p.m. And we'll explain what the 2-hour duration versus what a 6 to 8:30 p.m. is, because obviously that's not a 2-hour duration. There's a reason for that. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So what are the utility benefits? Obviously, we wanted a replacement for a coal plant in a renewable way. So this ability to do a battery bonus program, which did allow for increase in solar panels to the existing systems, we increased renewable energy by 14 megawatts. And then we had today, as of July-August timeframe, 14 megawatts of installed PV, as well as 29 megawatts of enabled battery systems. And that's the 4,000 customers that are currently actively participating. At the end of this year, early next year, we're expected to get that 29 megawatts to 47 megawatts and complete the 7,000 customers fully engaging into the grid. Reliability rise, as you can see from the math, if the renewable energy added was 14 megawatts and we added 29 megawatts of battery, we're actually using existing PV from the rooftop solar. About 15 megawatts now is doing a load shift, basically, sort of, from daytime to evening time. And that's an added benefit. We have a pretty extreme duck curve. So moving 50 megawatts from daytime to peak time is definitely a benefit. And also predictability. We're doing this every day. So the system operators, as they see the 29 megawatts eventually to 47, they'll see it every day, and they'll basically learn of a new load shape that will be taking place for the next 10 years. So that predictability does help. Next slide. So why is it from 6 to 8:30 p.m.? If we did this from 6 to 8 p.m., 47 megawatts, our grid is not that large. So 50 megawatts or 40 megawatts instantaneously all discharging at 6 p.m. is quite dangerous for our grid, actually. So our operational system, most of our generators have a ramping of about 2 megawatts per minute. So when we were developing this program, it was highly recommended from the operations side, please make sure your battery bonus program has a ramp. Virtual power plant should be mimicking a power plant, right? So we created a 2 megawatt per minute ramp. Therefore, we created basically 25 blocks of enrollment. First set of customers, please dispatch at 6 p.m., 6:01 p.m., 6:02 p.m. by 1 minute increment that ramps up to the 40 megawatts, 50 megawatts, and 20-25 minute time frame, which is why our total duration from ramp up to down is 6 to 8:30. Lessons learned here: minute level dispatch, extremely difficult to do, and I will talk a little bit more about, actually I can talk about it here. The lessons learned here is we were under extreme urgency. We had to get 50 megawatts as quickly as possible, and there was a lot of healthy debates about how do we go about this program. Well, we couldn't just sole source it to one battery company or one contractor. No, it was all hands on deck, which is why we went from a typical dispatchable program to a scheduled dispatch so everyone can participate. If we decided to do some sort of a pre-qualification to verify that the battery can actually deliver at these type of minute increment or can keep a system for 2 hours, it would have taken some time, no question. And the industry insisted that we do not have a pre-qualification and do a verification at the end of this. One of the lessons learned of that is we need to have a pre-qualification. There was one too many instance where a devices, multiple devices were installed. It couldn't meet the type of requirements we had, but it was already installed, and the counter argument will be, well, it's already installed, what would you like us to do? And that's a tough place for all of us to be, included the customer. So and that partial description was the minute level dispatch. Not everyone could do it, and we're finding out that even systems that claims to be dispatching at minute level is not. So we're working through that diligently throughout this process. Next slide. So this is an example of our system load curve. And as you can see, the duck curve going the daytime with an extreme reduction due to rooftop solar and other solar systems. And then we have our peak around 5 to 9 p.m. I had to create this slide deck relatively quickly. So in order to protect some sort of confidentiality, I removed the y-axis just for simplicity. So I would call it plausible deniability, that I don't get in trouble. So next slide, I wanted to show a little bit more detail. So this is the total picture. Next slide, please, is the peak time. And from 6 p.m., you can see a little dip. And then 6:15-ish, you'll see another dip. And then if you look at the 8 p.m., you don't see as much, but then 8:15 p.m., you see another ramp up. This is where we realize, something's not right. If we did our ramping very good, it would have been a lot smoother. So we noticed that a lot of these systems are actually dispatching at 6:15. A larger number of systems is dispatching at 6:15 together, and we don't like it. And right now it's okay at this number, but if all the systems does this is not good. So we're working with the OEMs to double checking, triple checking to see if they can do a firmware upgrade, whatever it takes to make sure we can smooth out this a little better. But it's another proof that this is a system level curve and battery bonus is visible. So it's actually good and bad. We're actually able to see it. So we're excited for that. Next slide. Customer benefits, I think that's quite obvious. The high upfront incentive is very attractive, but the third bullet is, actually, let me talk about the third bullet and then I'll go back to the second bullet. Third bullet, we have a net energy metering program that is highly, but vast majority of our rooftop PV actually continues to be the NEM customers. This program is actually closed. Through the program called Battery Bonus, the customer that had NEM had an opportunity to actually add solar panels to a closed program and participate in Battery Bonus. So that was quite the incentive for NEM customers that always wanted to add panels but couldn't, because if they did that, they would have lost their NEM status. So this was a quite an added benefit. And for those NEM customers, they could add a battery to add the fourth bullet, which is resilience. The grid outage, the customer now has a battery to keep their essentials going. Second bullet, I mentioned that we talked about the upfront incentive as the initial element, but it wasn't enrolling a lot of customers. So we got approval from the Hawaii PUC to add monthly incentives on top of the upfront incentives, but it was at $5 per kW. So we did ask to the general public, including the contractors, and can we put a cap to this battery size? Because if we do, let's say 10 kW or 15 kW, we're talking $50, $75 per month of incentives. And we were worried about not bill reduction, but actually going negative. But at that time, again, the urgency was there, where the industry did not support the right sizing of battery. That in itself is a philosophical difficulty, because there actually is no such thing as right sizing. And a household that buys a new electric vehicle, a household that has an addition in family, a household that has a decrease in family, you can't right size a battery in a 10-year direction. So, and if the customer wanted to create a resilient house where they could go days, again, there's no right sizing on that. So we understood where the industry was coming from, but the outcome is about close to half of our customer does have a rolling negative bill, which is from our side very hard to track. And we're trying to make sure, again, to learn from that, to apply it to future programs and how we can better the equity balancing a little bit more. But clearly there was customer benefits with the 7,000 customers participating. Next slide. Challenges for program development, export rate, net energy metering has no issues because they get compensated at retail, but all of our other programs does not get compensated at retail. So to come up with a balancing act, this continues to be our challenge with the parties on how do we sell programs like bring your own device, aggregator programs like battery bonus, and still be able to make sense, right? Why would you ask someone to export from the grid if they're going to get compensated less rather than to be self-consuming? So that philosophical challenge continues to be there. Incentive rate from a challenge standpoint, again, I repeat, this was a very emergency, urgent program. So the Hawaii PUC allowed us to offer a high incentive, but we didn't want to set it as a precedence either. But it did set a precedent. So if we go in with a new program that has a much lower incentive, the customer remembers that there was a high incentives, right? So the attraction of a future program gets diminished quite a bit from that. We talked a little bit about the complexity about dispatchability and being able to educating the customer of what exactly is that battery doing has been a challenge. And the commission actually asked us, we need to do a better job educating the customer in layman's term of what exactly a solar program is, BYOD program is. So we're continuing to try and communicate that more easily so that we can get customers to basically to reach out to the contractors. Hey, I want to sign up for that program. That one looks like a good program. That's the ultimate direction that we want to go to. And then financials, this was quite a learning experience. I am not a tax expert. I'm not a financial person, but I learned a lot about money depending on who owns the PV system, the customer or a lease model. Who should the money go to? How do we track that money? It was quite a bit of learning experience, especially when you have 7,000 of them. And then lastly, communications. As we think through these devices, we personally do not have any communications to it, right? So do we use AMI, cellular, customer Wi-Fi, private LTE? How do we get that reliable dispatchability going forward in a non-expensive way? This is, again, similar to the first bullet, an ongoing challenge for us that we would like to resolve in the near future. Next slide. I think I'm wrapping up soon. Yeah, I think this is the last slide. Future. So that was a battery bonus. We do have commission approved us to create a new program called Bring Your Own Device. And we want to be bring your own device. It's not battery, right? So and our area did merge between DR and DER. So we do want to stack other types of resources that is direct load control, whether that's thermostats, water heaters, pool pumps, heat pumps. We're looking into a variety of portfolio because the commission really emphasized equity, making sure everyone has an opportunity to participate in these types of programs. So we are looking to do that. At the same time, we have a job to keep the grid reliable, and we're finding out stacking of grid services can be difficult because of the setting of valuation and unintentionally double counting the values. Say 3 grid services needs to happen at the exact same time. Is that triple effect, or is it one and the same thing? It can be argued either way. So that valuation can be difficult on that. So we want to be very conscientious about, and also be able to educate the customer what is needed for their battery. Final bullet is the commission does have an open docket on microgrid, equity, and now wheeling. So we look very exciting times. We're going to be looking at many of these dockets together and making sure we can come up with CO programs that matches to the roadmap of our initially the 70% reduction of carbon by 2030 and eventually 100% renewable by 2045. Thank you, Jasmine, for driving. Next slide, I think is my final Mahalo slide. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Yoh. Can you guys hear me okay? I had to switch my audio. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And gosh, even though I know so much about the Hawaiian Electric battery bonus program, even I have a few questions. So I think our Q&A session is going to be really interesting. And again, you guys be thinking of how much deeper you'd like to go on either the specific example or more on the broad overview that RMI provided with their playbook. I would also want to just mention more anecdotally that with my work that I do at the Hawaii Commission, the PUC here, we do again support the Hawaii Energy Contract, which is the energy efficiency third-party implementer that serve the Hawaiian Electric customers. And we're always looking for ways to partner or collaborate the two programs, meaning Hawaiian Electric and Hawaii Energy. And in Yoh's presentation about battery bonus, one example was the offering of additional incentives for commercial customers in that battery bonus program. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk a bit more about successes and challenges in that front in the Q&A part, but just adding a little bit more color, to the not only importance for partnerships, but the customer engagement piece, as Mary pointed out too in her overview, is just such a critical part of VPP deployment. So again, thank you, Yoh. Very thorough and helpful presentation. So let's turn it over to Amy Findlay with Eversource.
Great, thank you, Ashley, and thank you for having me here. So I'm Amy Findlay. I manage our demand response managed EV charging programs at Eversource. So a little bit of background about me. My background is actually in civil engineering, went back to business school, and I've been at Eversource ever since. So a lot of the 10 years that I've spent here has been focused on our behavioral programs and digital customer engagement. So it sort of lends itself very well to this intersection of sort of IT and system operations in this VPP space that I'm operating in now. So just a bit of background about Eversource for those of you who aren't familiar. We're the largest energy company in New England. We serve over 4 million customers across New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Massachusetts and Connecticut Electric are the bulk of those customers. And the energy efficiency portfolio is actually what contains our current demand response or VPP programs that we're able to offer. And that is significant because we are currently only able to target the ISO New England system peak. The benefits that we derive by doing that are what justifies the program incentives. So I just wanted to point that out that, we talk about VPP being able to provide grid services more broadly, but for us currently, those compensation mechanisms that would allow us to do more localized targeting of distribution constraints don't exist with the current Connected Solutions program. So I believe that Mary, one of the utilities that you mentioned that you profiled for that VPP Flipbook was National Grid and Connected Solutions, which is the program that I manage. We actually have a couple of different battery programs, a different EV charging program, but Connected Solutions is sort of the bulk of the VPP that I'm going to focus on today. So here's what we have in what we would call the Eversource VPP. And I do want to caveat that a little bit by saying that this is the behind the meter assets only. So I sit within the customer group and run the customer programs from the energy efficiency team. So the only programs that I see are really those where customers themselves are enrolling and sort of doing that load shedding and participating in events. We have other front of the meter assets that might be solar generation that we own, or different assets that you have interconnected and we have interconnection agreements with, but those are a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm able to manage. But within our Eversource VPP, which is a bring your own device, pay for performance, we do have some enrollment incentives for residential customers only, but we span across residential, commercial, industrial, and with all those assets combined, we are able to get about 190 megawatts of load shed during ISO New England system peak events. So just for a sort of a sense of scale, ISO New England, which includes the 5 states in New England, we're about 50% of the total load Eversource is. And across all of the program administrators, so that's us, and National Grid, Efficiency Maine, Rhode Island Energy, we all collectively try to call our events at the same time. So this Eversource VPP is sort of part of a broader effort across all the program administrators on ISO New England when we call these events. And the reason that is significant is because you can actually see the impact of our VPP at that ISO level. So this is sort of a typical curve pulled from the ISO New England Express chart, which my team follows pretty closely during the summer, because ISO New England is summer peaking. Typically, events are called between 3 to 8 p.m. on hot summer weekdays, and we'll do our sort of all-call events probably about 5 times this past year, but that's pretty typical. And the reason for that is because we include both, as I mentioned, residential customers and large C&I customers. For our largest C&I customers, this is not a small task to ask them to do some curtailment. While some of them might have BMS program, others it becomes a real financial decision when it comes to shutting down, an industrial process line. And can you make up for, with our program incentives, that potential lost revenue? So we're very sort of selective when we do these all-call, or what we call our targeted events. So you can see the impact here. It's about, you can see the dip. It equates to about 300 megawatts across all the PAs, and we're responsible for about 190 of it. But really what we're doing here, as you can tell, is sort of load shifting. And I think very successfully demonstrated that we are able to do that across the last couple of years. Where we're starting to think now is more along the lines of what Yoh was talking about. Can we do more load shaping? So can we get a little bit more sophisticated about not just causing this big drop when our event starts? Here, this was an event that was about 4 to 7 p.m. But can we try and just smooth the curve rather than having that huge dip? And what sort of combinations of assets can we use and turn on and off at different times to get that more consistent load shed? So talking a little bit about, I apologize, I had to both, it's quite blurry now that I'm looking at it. But talking about the different assets that we have enrolled. And this is a breakdown just of our Massachusetts assets. And the reason that I sort of narrowed this down to just Massachusetts is because we still allow generation as a viable, fossil fuel generation as a viable participation method in Connecticut and New Hampshire, but we do not in Massachusetts just because of overall decarbonization policy goals. We will be phasing out generation in Connecticut next year also. New Hampshire is in a little bit of a different state, so that's a little, not literally and figuratively, with regard to their decarbonization policy. So that also sort of creates some disparity in the eligible participation types for our program. But this was just looking at the contribution from those different assets in Massachusetts, because I feel like that at this point is probably the most representative of what we're going to see going forward. And the blue here is C&I contributions, and green is residential contributions. Now, if you looked at this graph 2 years ago, it's really interesting to see how the share of residential thermostats has increased and the share of curtailment between that targeted curtailment and daily curtailment, which the difference there is how often we call on those assets for events. So targeted is that sort of most exclusive one that I was talking about earlier. Daily is things like HVAC controls that a customer that might be programmed in a BMS that a customer can do more often. So they participate more often and are compensated differently. But the share of residential thermostats has really increased, where we used to see about a 3-to-1, 75%, 25 split between C&I and residential contribution. Now we're getting closer to about a 50-50 split with, the residential thermostats and batteries about equaling the contribution from C&I batteries and C&I curtailment. And I thought this would be helpful to highlight too. And thinking back to Mary's presentation, I don't know exactly how this correlates with those 3 different structures that you presented, but this is sort of our overall approach to DERMS. So when you think about these DERMS that are connected to customer-owned behind the meter assets, we call those our aggregator or our edge DERMS. And those really serve all those customer-facing functions like processing enrollments, paying out incentives, all the sorts of event notifications that go a little bit beyond just the operational considerations. We are currently just, my team is the one that is actually calling these events and monitoring the ISO New England, to see when those peak days are going to be. But as we get more sophisticated and get greater visibility into actual system needs and system operations, we'll be taking cues from a grid DERMS that we are in the process of standing up. We're starting off small with 5 substations in Western Massachusetts, but that is what we are planning on, having to coordinate with to kind of take our signal from, is that what we're calling the grid or operational DERMS. And that operational DERMS will also have, visibility into the SCADA and ADMS, and we'll be taking cues from there. In addition, we'll have visibility to all those assets over which we have direct control. So that grid DERMS is going to be sort of like the central brains that will tell, the aggregator DERMS, here's the relief I need at these locations. Okay, aggregator DERMS, go find it and go execute it. And to the point, and it's sort of the question that I had asked earlier about the definition of an open sort of platform, we actually do have a couple of different DERMS or EV aggregators that are in our VPP for that very reason, that we want to expand coverage and sort of cover as much from an OEM perspective as possible to enable as many customers to participate as they can. So that was really all I had planned to talk about today, but happy to take questions in the Q&A. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. Great to hear, again, some real world examples of the actual deployment of VPPs. And thank you to the attendees also. There's been a lot of activity in the chat and in the Q&A, teeing up some great questions. So why don't we turn first, let's see, Stephanie, thank you so much for your engagement here in the chat. Stephanie had some questions even earlier on. I think this was even during the RMI presentation. So I would just open it up to maybe RMI with an overview. And if you have any specific examples you'd like to get into more, either Yoh or Amy. But this question is, does VPP get paid for capacity in the various grid regions?
Maybe I can provide a general overview, and Amy, that makes me think of your example and kind of what you mentioned for how you're getting compensated for connected solutions specifically. So kind of building off of what Amy mentioned is that there are some payments where if it's building into the capacity market, for example, then that is one way where that payment is being sourced. There are other programs. If it's a frequency response market, we've seen some, like for Green Mountain Power example, for their battery program, they have a small set of their batteries that they are bidding into that market as another way for some of that payment. And so that's 2 examples, but I think broadly across those payment structures will vary. But Amy, I'm curious if you can add a bit more color from your specific program.
About, actual compensation based on performance. I guess it's a little bit different on the residential thermostat side. We get an enrollment incentive, and then we pay you, flat $20 a year just for staying enrolled and participating in events, or a majority of the events. For batteries, we'll pay based on average kW discharge during the course of our events. For batteries, we typically call about 30 to 60 events in a season. And then for the large CNI curtailment, it's $200 for that daily $200 per kW, like average kW load shed across all the events. And there's 30 to 60 events. It gets so complex. I'm sorry, I know. And that's why I didn't put this on a slide. I didn't want to overwhelm anyone. But it's about 30 to 60 events in July and August for that daily curtailment option. And then the targeted curtailment, that's $35 per kW. And those, we proposed to increase those. We launched Connected Solutions in 2019 and really hadn't revisited those commercial incentive levels. So we proposed to increase those for our next 3-year plans.
Thanks, Amy. Actually, I'll pivot to another question from Stephanie and ask Yoh to chime in if you can. Just another interesting one regarding the dispatch. So can you talk a bit about when VPP dispatch happens and how VPPs control the amount of load provided to the grid?
Not battery bonus, but in general. Yeah, in general.
Just in general. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, understood. So from our side, very similar to Amy, our calculation of payment is very complicated, but the dispatches, the operator will go to our DRMS and say we want a event of 4 hours. They can make that decision up to 10 minutes prior or a day ahead. Obviously, the earlier that decision could be made, the better forecasting the aggregators of VPPs can make. That signal for us is OpenADR. We send an OpenADR signal to the aggregator, and then aggregator then, I think Amy had that picture that shows from the aggregator, they send to individual devices that are participating, and that connection is usually customer Wi-Fi, sometimes cellular, so that the battery reciprocates and responds to that discharge. What usually happens to that is the battery is then told to deliver a kW amount, and it'll serve the home load first, and then it'll export back accordingly. So whatever residual comes out is the performance. Customer receives a full capacity payment of their committed amount, regardless of the performance. The aggregators and virtual power plants, they get paid by the performance, actual performance. So if the committed amount by the individual customers is not that good, they need to sharpen their pencils. It's the onus is on the aggregators to be better. The precision is required when we dispatch these events. We dispatch our events close to 140, 150 times a year for the aggregators programs.
Thank you, Yoh. In discussing the deployment of VPPs, another question came in for both HECO and Eversource. So maybe we'll go back over to you, Amy, quickly, and then to Yoh. But do you limit the boundaries of aggregation of VPP for generation nodes?
So we have, and this sort of gets back to the load shaping rather than just load shifting that we're trying to do. And that is where I think we are just going for as much as we can possibly get at this time. And that has sort of been the focus, build up the VPPs and demonstrate the impact on ISO New England. Now, as we sort of move into this, okay, can we be a little bit more sophisticated? This very question is coming up. Could we orchestrate like a consistent, 10 megawatts of load shed over, an event for a certain group of assets? And those are the types of things that we are starting to think about, analyzing historical participation, figuring out, thermostats, for example. If you call a 3-hour event, you get great load shed within the first hour, and then it drops off a bit. So how do you sort of stagger even with like different, thermostat groups within your thermostat VPP to sort of create that consistency? So those are absolutely the types of use cases that we're looking to, because as we start to move away from just massive load shifting on ISO New England and really trying to target local distribution constraints, that's probably where the value that VPPs can provide is not just, how much can you get and how quickly, it's how sort of orchestrated can you be to make this look like it is an actual power plant.
Thank you, Amy. For us, this is a good question. We do not limit boundaries for per generation nodes. And if I'm interpreting the question correctly, the generation nodes are individual house as a generation node participating as a sub part of an aggregation. We do not, which is why the battery bonus was very good and shoulder situation scary. I say shoulder because 7,000 application, vast majority of the customers are doing exactly what we envisioned to do, but some of the shoulder cases on the left and the right where they're not really doing anything, and we're like, are you participating? And so we're actually reaching out to make sure the battery is doing what they're supposed to do. And then the other side, they're making thousands of dollars, and they're really, really, really negative compared to someone else, skewing the average negative balance. So is that okay? Is that acceptable? And to Amy's point, we're still growing, we're still learning. So as we go forward, do we need to eventually come up with a better rule of thumb per household and whatnot? But we're still 33% RPS, right? And we have a long way to go. So argument can go either way, saying they're doing their part. So then my argument would be, okay, as long as we're cost effective, if one customer wants to do this, then we're good to go. So we have to be very cautious of that.
Thank you both. Was wondering if either of you, either from your specific deployment examples, or even if Mary, if you wanted to chime in too, because this of course is one of your 7 listed benefits, but just in the customer engagement piece, just any kind of lessons learned. I know you've already shared a bit about that in your presentations, but whether you want to talk about, like the commercial versus residential experience, or like the renter versus homeowner challenges, just anything about what you're seeing and have been learning as you've been deploying these programs in terms of getting customers to hop on board. Anybody can chime in, but and maybe Amy, you want to go for it first?
So what was the specific question? I'm sorry, just about customer engagement in general.
Yeah, just generally any kind of just lessons learned in the real world deployment of I know you've already offered.
Yeah, so I think that these partnerships with OEMs and making it really easy for customers to enroll, and Mary touched on that point, but that is really the key. So Nest thermostats, for example, on setup is when you can enroll in a program. And that to me is, you're setting up your thermostat. It's part of the cycle. And then there's in-app advertising sort of the entire time that they're engaging with that thermostat on a regular basis. So I think that, making that, one-click easy enrollment for a customer right in their native OEM app is really effective. We also will do, marketing emails to our customers to let them know, hey, Eversource is there too. This is really important to us. If you own an eligible thermostat, please enroll. You can click this link, or if you're needing a new thermostat, go to our marketplace, buy one that is pre-enrolled. So as soon as you put it on the wall, there's no additional steps for you to take. So I think that really eliminating friction in the enrollment process is so key.
Yeah, I'll echo everything that Amy just said. And I think that pulls like a variety of different case studies. Additionally, Puget Sound Energy comes to mind in the West. They also talk about leveraging customer data to a cohesive and effortless experience to maximize participation. So all of their programs have the same similar interface, PSC branded, PSC everything, if they're leveraging Uplight as their partner to manage all in the back end, but from the customer perspective, it's a consistent experience. And they're able to leverage data specific insights as they're going with their emails, newsletters, and websites for a more tailored experience. It's also has worked well for that positive feedback loop. I'm not sure. Another thing that's kind of maybe I'm curious if this has been your experience with some of the commercial industrial
I
customers.
was going to touch on that because that's totally different. Yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
From some of the programs, from the thinking of some of the larger demand responses, seeing approaches we're going, each facility and each larger customer is different. For some of these individual facilities, going and having conversations with those business owners and saying, what can you turn down? What is like more kind of a specific approach in some cases for have them understand and kind of get them bought on what might be expected from them.
Right.
And-
Yeah. I think that additional segmentation for large C&I customers is so key because there's certain sectors that we found are just better, quite frankly, at estimating their, nominations of what they can actually do and then actually delivering on that than others. So just as an example, last summer, we typically are, annual peak will hit in July or August. Last year, we had a September peak after Labor Day. So all of our colleges and universities were already back in session. We sent out the notification that we were calling an event, and participation among colleges and universities, given the timing of when that peak occurred last year, was zero, basically. None of them wanted to participate because it wasn't worth causing their residents, that level of discomfort because school was back in session. It's a lot easier. You have to take into consideration these different sort of like operational scenarios. And like I was saying, like sometimes this becomes a financial decision as well. But also you look at like sectors like hospitals, and there's so much about like having that, the HVAC is clearly the biggest opportunity for DR participation when we're summer peaking, but like having that, comfortable, controlled environment like for patients is something that is like really very important. And sometimes, there's just business operations that don't lend itself to being a good candidate for ADR or for demand response or VPPs. So I think that's important to keep in mind too, is that it's not for everyone. I think it's maybe a little bit easier for residential customers, but for large C&I, it has to be a lot more tailored. And I also think too, where we have curtailment service providers who are very active in forward capacity markets and talking to our large C&I customers about that, in addition to ICAP tag management, in addition to connected solutions revenue. So there's sort of 3 different value streams that they're using simultaneously to get customers to come on board and participate. And we rely on those curtailment service providers for most of our go-to-market strategy on the C&I side, but we haven't figured out how do we reach that next tier of not the huge colleges and universities, our largest industrial clients, like those sort of small to medium businesses, that might be more like a residential sort of mass market approach than that sort of customized one-on-one engagement.
Great. Thank you, Amy and Mary. I'm just looking at the time and we're right here at the bottom of the scheduled meeting time. And I just wanted to thank everyone. Yoh, I wanted to call out for both you and for Amy. There were 2 questions in the chat that were posed to you directly. So please take a look at those. And if you have a chance to write in quickly before we round this up, that's great. Otherwise, we can maybe provide some answers after the meeting. So just calling those 2 out for you. And Rodney, I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks everyone for your great presentations. And sorry that we didn't have a lot of time here for the state roundabout, but back to you, Rodney. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for leading this wonderful discussion. Thank you very much to our guest speakers and to all of you participating. We had a very rich discussion, which is gratifying, and I'm sure there are a lot of other questions and thoughts that will emerge from this. So again, thank you. Please do check out our web pages. We will post the slides and in this case, a recording in not too long a period. and we do keep our list of participants informed of new events and resources. If you are not on our list and you are new to this working group, please send us a note, and we would be very happy to have you join the working group. And also, I'll ask folks for suggestions for future topics as well. So with that, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Rodney. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rodney.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's great.